This was supposed to be filmed at that field that you saw in the intro, but ironically, the wind ruined the audio. So we're back in studio to give you guys some quick tips on using your Kestrel to make better wind calls. If you've been doing distance shooting for a while or taken a course, then you're probably familiar with these ideas. So there are chapter selections down at the bottom and also in the description. So that way you can just skip ahead to see other things, and I don't have to hear you in the comments about how you already know these things. Moving on, before we dive into the tips, there are 3 things I want us to remember. 1, wind is not constant. It is always changing. So the direction of wind will always be slightly changing. The speed of wind will always be slightly changing. It is never the same. And the reason this is important is because when you make a wind call or when you're reading wind, just know it's going to be different at the time you break the shot. The shorter amount of time between the time you make the wind call and the time you break the shot, the more accurate your wind call is going to be. The second thing is wind moves like wind. Now, I know that's obvious, but a lot of instructors like to use the illustration of wind moving like water. And that is a great illustration. It helps a lot of people see how the wind moves across the terrain like water would. For me, I like to envision it as wind moving across a race car. So I'm really big into F1, and one of the things I love to look at is the wind tunnel footage and to see how every little change they make, placing different bits of carbon, changing the way the air flows around the car, and how it shapes what the wind is doing to give them the most amount of downforce when they need it, the least amount of drag when they need it. So I think that's a really cool thing to see. I enjoy that, but it's also helped me to understand how wind moves across the terrain, because wind doesn't like 90-degree angles. It doesn't like sharp angles, which is why if you're ever in a big city, there's always some kind of breeze or wind because the air has to fill in the gaps around those sharp corners. So that's why you'll get those swirling winds in big downtown cities that have big skyscrapers. It's the wind having to fill those gaps. Now we see similar things on range when we have berms, when you have tree lines. If you've ever been out on like a farm property where you have a tree lined area and then all of a sudden there's a big gap or a big opening in there, and it's because the wind is cutting through like a jet stream. And if you look where that corner is, where that's cutting through, you'll notice right there's a little pocket where the wind will start to do weird stuff, and you'll notice the wind is going different directions. This is the minutia of it, but just know wind moves like wind. It's helped me to envision it. Maybe the water one works for you better. Whatever, but whatever works for you to be able to see or envision how the wind is moving across the terrain will help you long term. Third and final thing is that we only know what the wind is doing where we're at. And what this does is it gives us a data point, a reference point to be able to determine what the wind is doing downrange. By having a data point where we're at, it allows us to then look at the wind downrange and know if it's going faster or slower and kind of gauge about how much faster or how much slower it's going. For example, when we're driving down the highway and you're going 65 miles an hour and a car slowly goes past you, we know that car is going faster than 65 miles an hour. But is that car going 80 miles an hour? Probably not. Maybe 70, maybe a little over 70, but we have an idea of about how fast that car is going. Now, if you're going 65 and a car blows past you, we know they're going faster than 70 miles an hour. They're probably doing 80, 90 miles an hour, depending on how fast they go past you. That same method, that same concept is what we do with wind. So by knowing what it's doing at us, we can look downrange and go, okay, that wind downrange, the vegetation, what the bugs are doing, what the trees are doing, what the dirt's doing, is moving faster than what's happening where we're at. So we already know that we're gonna have to hold more wind than what we're getting off of our data point here. So just keep that in mind. The first thing I want to talk about is quick wind. Now, I'm sure this is something a lot of you are familiar with or that you've at least heard, but something I get a lot of questions about is what is your gun number? How do you find your gun number? How do you use that as a part of quick wind? Now, again, if you take a class with any of the guys I mentioned earlier, they will go more in depth on this and help you use it better than I can, but give you kind of the down and dirty. That way you have an idea for the concept, some sort of framework. So when you go into the class, you have an idea of what they're talking about. So the old school way of getting your gun number was you would go into your ballistic solver or like your Kestrel, you'd go to 500 yards for your distance and you start bumping up the wind at either 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, start bumping up the wind until you hit 0.5 mils hold for your 500 yard target. So for example, I have this in here, I've already got 500 yards as my target. And then you see the winds coming out at 3 o'clock at 3 miles an hour, and it's telling me I need to hold right 0.46. Now we're gonna round that up to 0.5. Also, the environmentals in this are for what is currently going on in the room and not what's outside. If I go outside, this actually bumps up to like 0.48, 0.5. That gives me my gun number. My gun number is 3, or that's the way we would go about doing it. Now there is a faster solution. So if you have a Kestrel that has applied ballistics in it, there's a little bit of a cheat code, a little bit of a hack that you can use to get some better information. So what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna scroll down in the main menu to where your environmentals are, and you're gonna lock those. So when you do this, make sure you do it outside, make sure you do it in what your environmentals are, so that way you're getting a more accurate number. But we've got our environmentals locked, and then we're gonna scroll down to accuracy first. You're gonna push enter on accuracy first, and the first thing that pops up is quick wind. So you're gonna take that, push enter on there. You'll go down to calculate. And when you see calculate, push enter again. It's going to give you your quick wind number. So my gun number for quick wind is 3.3 miles an hour. How do we get values out of it? How do we use it? You know, our gun number. So we know my gun number was 3.3 miles an hour. We're going to round that to 3 just for simplicity's sake. But essentially what it means is that when we have a full value wind or a wind coming out of the 3 or 9 o'clock, that our wind hold is going to be point whatever the yardage is. So for example, with a 3 mile an hour wind out of the 3 o'clock, what we would call full value wind would be 0.1 mils at 100 yards, 0.2 mils at 200 yards, 0.3 mils at 300 yards, so on, all the way down to 1,000. And then we have these brackets. So you'll see a bracket like this in a class of 2, 3, 4 after that. These are multiplications. So 2 times whatever your gun number is, 3 times whatever your gun number is, 4 times whatever your gun number is. And what that means is that when the wind hits, for me, it would be when the wind hits 6 miles an hour, then I'm going to come to this bracket. When it hits 9 miles an hour, I'm going to come to this bracket. When it's 12 miles an hour, I'm going to come to this bracket. If your gun number is, for example, 7, then it would be 7 times 1. So when the wind is 7 miles an hour, this would be your quick wind hold. When the wind is 14 miles an hour, this would be your next wind hold, and so on and so forth. You just keep doing that. So this is all going to be dependent on your ballistics, your bullet, your velocity, your environmentals, all that. So it's going to change for everybody, but this is kind of the down and dirty of what the quick wind theory is. So you would use this to determine wind holds or wind value based on the mile an hour wind that you're experiencing in your environmentals. But this is where the Kestrel comes in, right? Very simple. Everybody kind of knows this. But with the Kestrel, I always tell guys, I'm like, dude, take your Kestrel, mess with stuff, just see what's going on. Like, there's more to this. If you start changing little things, you can start to identify different trends, different patterns that maybe don't line up with things that we always thought to be true. That's why this says theory. Remember, I have my environmental set, 500-yard target, 3 mile an hour wind out of 3 o'clock. If we go down to range card, which range card on your Kestrel is going to give you your yardages and the holds for different increments of whatever you have it set. I have mine at 25 yards. So every 25 yards is going to give me a reading of what my hold is for that. It's going to give me a wind call as well. So what we can do is we can see how this actually tracks with what I'm seeing in the Kestrel. So when we go down, you're going to go down to 400 yards. So let's go back up here. So at 200 yards, we are at 0.2. At 300 yards, we're in the 0.3 range. 400 yards, we're at 0.4. At 500 yards, we're at 0.5. At 600 yards, we're at 0.6. But at 700 yards, we start to see something different. So at 700 yards, yes, it starts out at 0.7, but then you notice here, we're going to start seeing 0.77, 0.8, 0.85. And we need to make the jump up to 0.8 as our quick wind versus 0.7. And then if we keep going further, at 0.8, it's in the 0.9s. But then when we get to 9, at 900 yards, we're in the 1.1s. And then at 1,000, we're actually at 1.2. So you see how that discrepancy starts to change. So what I've done is I've already written all this out to speed up the process. I went through my Kestrel, and what I did was I went through and checked this, and I found the actual data of what it would be. So this is why this says actual. But I found the actual data for quick wind for me. So one thing you're going to notice, and this is again dependent on my bullet, on my velocity, my environmentals. But what you'll notice is at 600 yards, 600 to 700 yards, we actually take a jump from 0.6 to 0.8. And then it follows 0.9, and then between 800 and 900, you go from 0.9 to 1.1. And then at 1,000 yards, we go up to 1.2. Now, my uneducated assumption would be that what's happening is that as your bullet is in the air longer, as it's losing velocity, it's also losing efficiency. So your BC is directly tied to your velocity. Now, there's more to this, there's more science behind it. There are much more educated men who have gone in depth on this, but you can do some of the research on that through Applied Ballistics, through Kestrel. They have some information there. And then again, any of the classes I mentioned earlier, take those guys and they can explain it as well. But as the bullet starts to lose velocity, it's losing its BC. So the BC is starting to get worse. And so this is going to continue to happen the longer it is in flight, and it's going to bleed off efficiency and continue to bleed off velocity, which is why we're getting these jumps at these yardages. If we were to continue this chart down, I think you would continue to see those same jumps, but they would get larger and larger and larger. Again, this is quick wind. Now there's something I want us to keep in mind, and that is that distance equals time. So at 700 yards, when this starts to go into effect, and even all the way out to 8, 9, 1,000, we have time to make good wind calls. So in here, in the 600-yard range, in the 600-yard box, you can use the same quick wind, right? Very simple, very fast. When you start to get out further, yes, if you need to make that quick wind call, you can, but you just need to do the homework for yourself. You need to proof your own data. So take your information in your Kestrel, proof your data, see what that really is, build out your own custom hard card. And some of you guys asked for the one that I made. I'm gonna tweak that one a little bit and make it available for y'all so that you can make your own custom hard card out of that so that it matches your data. But you need to make your own data card, your hard card that has the information that lines up with what your bullet is doing at distance. And at these distances, you have time to make a good wind call. Even if it's a split second more, you would have time to make a good wind call and have a higher likelihood of having a first round impact or a better follow-up shot. That is gun number and quick wind. Hopefully that makes sense. And the way that we use this, right? So the way that this would be used, for example, and again, in a class, they will cover it more, but you would essentially assign a value. So we would say there's a 6 mile an hour wind, right? If there was a 6 mile an hour wind at 500 yards, it's a one mil hold for me if the wind is coming out of 3 o'clock. And then what you would do is simply take your wind rose, use a quick wind rose. You don't have to go super in depth with it, but a quick wind rose, if it's coming out of like a 230, you would apply that percentage to this 1 mil, and that would be your hold, right? Again, go take a class. Those guys know way more than I do, and they'll help you a lot more than I will. So the second thing I want to talk about is wind brackets. Now, wind brackets are something that we can use to make more educated wind calls, and why this matters, especially like at matches. The wind is always doing something, right? Especially here in Texas, we will have like a slow, lull wind of like 3 miles an hour, and then we could have gusts of wind up to 10, 12, 15 miles an hour. And there could be gaps in between, it could be really fast, whatever. But you do have this gap of a window of wind, if you will. And what a bracket does is it gives you your two extremes, and it's the two edges of that window, if you will. So your wind is going to be somewhere in there at any given time. We can make wind brackets. Now, some guys do it different. They will do 2 columns. They will do a low wind and a high wind. And then some guys will even go so far to make one in the middle. Again, as we talked about earlier, if you're starting a stage and at the start of the stage, there is no wind or very little wind, and then all of a sudden, as soon as the timer goes off, your luck kicks in, and then now the wind is full value. What you can do is if you have that wind bracket, you know you can already jump to that next spot in your wind bracket and know that's gonna be your wind hold. Or if you have one in the middle, maybe the wind just picks up a little bit, and you do a third column, one in the middle, you have an idea to go. Let me show you what I mean by that. So when you take a wind reading with your Kestrel, it's gonna give you 2 numbers. It's gonna give you WS1 and WS2. So WS1 is going to be your wind on the low end. WS2 is gonna be your wind on the high end. And what this does, it makes a bracket for you. So you're sticking at 500 yards, and the low end, it was 3 miles an hour. So our hold would be 0.46 on the low end of the bracket. And on the high end of the bracket, with the gusting wind, it would be 1.84. So that gives us a window to work in. Now, you see, it's a pretty big window, right? And that's why some guys do that middle column. They'll split the difference and put it there. It all depends on what's going on around you. It depends on what you prefer to do, how much information you like, but that is a quick and easy way to make wind brackets. And it's just giving us a higher probability of making those first round impacts. And this really matters. In gas gun doesn't matter so much because you can afford to have the miss and make a fast follow-up shot. You're not really penalized for it. It's just a small amount of time. But in like PRS, when you're limited in the amount of shots you can take, it's really important to have a first round impact or to have a good idea of what the wind is doing right off the bat. Use that as you will, context dependent, but something you can use with your Kestrel. It already gives you the wind brackets. The third thing I want to talk about is what I'm calling the Ryder method. Now, this is a concept I picked up from Ryder, who is a Army Marksman Unit Reserve, or no, Army Reserve Marksman Unit, whatever it is. That's one of those two. Ryder, correct it in the comments, I'm sorry. Either way, he competes, he does a lot of NRL Hunter, and he's been doing really well in NRL Hunter, and he's been podiuming quite a bit. Anyways, he's been doing well. And at the last NRL match, Taylor and I got to hang out with him, and he babysat us for a while, but he gave us some tips on what he does for wind and kind of how he makes his own little bracket. He does some other things too, but this was something he did, and when he was talking about it at the match, I was like, hey, it's a good idea. I think I'm gonna steal that. I'll give him credit, but I'm gonna share it with you guys, and so it's his secret sauce. He may be a little upset by it, but love you. So what Ryder does is he will make a bracket, but it's a very simplified bracket. And what he does is he takes a wind reading. So when you use your Kestrel, right, we calibrate our compass, you do the spinny thing, you calibrate, you get your target direction first, and then you get your wind direction, and then you read your wind value. So it's gonna spit out a number for you of what your hold should be at whatever target distance you've input. So what Ryder will do is he'll set a default input distance for 500 yards, and then he'll do all that, get his wind reading, and it spits out for him that his hold needs to be 1.1 mils at 500 yards based on the wind speed and the wind direction for 500 yards. And he takes that one number of 1.1 mils, and that's his bracket. So what he's doing is he's bracketing the distance and not necessarily the wind speed. So think of it, the way he does it is At 500 yards, he knows that's his hold. If it's anything under that, he knows he needs to bleed off that hold and start to hold more straight up from the 1.1. And then anything beyond that, he knows he needs to hold more wind beyond that. This is just a quick way for him in the integral hunter context where you're shooting unknown distances to be able to make a more educated wind call. And again, using his Kestrel to make it happen. Thought that was really cool, thought I'd share that with you. Hopefully he lets me leave it in the video and I don't have to take it out. The fourth and final thing I want to talk about, and probably the most important, is that all of this is dependent on our ability to be able to see and feel the changes in wind. So when I was talking with the AMU guys at the last Integral Hunter, I was picking their brain about their workflow and how they read wind and how they practice it. And I was trying to get anything out of them that I could. And the main thing they said was like, dude, it just takes a lot of time. There's a lot of time behind the cartridges, seeing what the wind does to the bullet, seeing what the bullet does at different distances, and just essentially setting up data in the back of your mind of, oh yeah, at this distance and this wind, it did this. And it kind of sets you up where you have something to pull from over time and being able to just look at vegetation, look at the environmentals and see and go, okay, yeah, that looks like a 12-mile-an-hour wind, or that looks like a 3-mile-an-hour wind, and to be able to do that very quickly on the clock. That's something that has helped them. So we need to get in a lot of reps of reading wind, of seeing what mirage looks like and putting a value to that, seeing what the trees are doing and putting a value to that, seeing what the grass is doing and putting a value to that. So one thing I've tried to start doing, and if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen me do this as I travel throughout the country, I keep a Kestrel with me. If I pull over for gas, I'll stop and take a wind reading. I'll look at the trees, I'll look at the veg, anything around me that'll give me any indication of what the wind is doing, flags, any of that, mirage, and in my mind, I'm putting together a value for that wind. I'm like, okay, that's a 7-8 mile an hour wind, and then I'll take out my Kestrel, take a wind reading, and so one thing you can do is you can double click the light button, and it's gonna pull up this menu. You can scroll up or down, and you go until you get to your live wind reading. There you go, your wind speed. So if I were to take this out and hold it up, it's gonna give me a live wind speed of what the wind is doing. And it's just a quick way for you to see and just watch and go, okay, yeah, felt that gust felt like a 10 mile an hour. Yep, it was 10 mile an hour. It's an easy way for you to put a value to what you're seeing and what you're feeling. And this is something you can do throughout the day, right? So if you're going on a walk with the kids, if they're playing at the park, if you're stuck in traffic, anything like that where you have an opportunity to look around you and then put a value to what you're seeing and feeling, that's where this comes in handy. Now, that's all making a wind call. Applying that wind call and being able to actually get hits, that's another story, which is why I said go check out the guys who actually teach, because they'll tell you how to do that. So I want to share one last thing before I leave, and that is I was talking to a PRS shooter by the name of Don Leopard, and he shared two things with me. He said that the key to taking advantage of wind calls is, one, being stable enough for any of this to matter. If you're so unstable in a position that you're wobbling off target, like you might be making good wind calls, but you're not taking advantage of it because your wobble zone is throwing the bullets who knows where, right? So one, getting stable. Two, having good enough recoil management to be able to spot what the bullet is doing at impact. And it's not just misses, it's also hits. Knowing why you hit and where you hit is just as important as knowing where you missed. And somebody that I saw that embodied this is Larry from Ridgeline. When we did the unknown distance drill and we're shooting up the hill, the whole time Larry's making small corrections on what the wind is doing because the wind was changing up there in the mountains. And so as he's going further up, he's starting to hold more and more wind, and he could see his recoil management was so good, he could see his miss. So before we could ever see or hear the lack of a sound of an impact, he was already sending the next bullet to correct the shot. So it was really cool to see that. So that's where I'm at. I'm trying to work on that to be able to be at that level. But that takes time and it takes good fundamentals to do that. So just thought I'd leave you guys with that. Thanks to Don for sharing that little tip. And yeah, go follow any of the guys I mentioned in this video. They'll make you a better shooter. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, karate chop that bell so you get notified every time I upload a video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cool. I felt good about that. Did you feel good about that? I felt good about it. Maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't. Some beautiful birds out today. Fantastic. My buddy Dave would love this. Dave's a good, big bird watching guy. He's big on the birds. Hey, buddy. What did you get?
An axolotl.
An axle. You want to show the camera really quick?
Hey,
Look, and then we can even put it right here. Take a look. Spin it around. Yeah. Look at that. Is that an axolotl?
Yeah.
What? That's pretty awesome. Are you gonna go build it? Yeah.
With help with Mom.
With help with Mom. Okay, I love it. Fantastic.
Yep.
Okay, did you do your homework today?
No.
Okay, I need you to do your homework before you build that. Okay, James. What did Dad say? Come here. Yes, sir. Come, boy. Get over here. Get over here. When I'm done, I'll come help you, okay? Okay. Well, this is gonna be a super long edit.